Here is a clip on the production of puff pastry. It's often used in the sweet kitchen, but sometimes in the savoury kitchen. We start the process by making what we call ourselves a base dough. It's made from hard flour, in this case 500 grams. We've got 25 ml of white wine vinegar, 10 grams of salt, 50 grams of unsalted butter which has been melted, and to that we add 200 to 225 ml of cold water. The water will vary each time, just depending on the type of flour and quality of flour. It's important that we bring all of those ingredients together to form a relatively smooth and soft ball. This is what we call the base dough, and it's this dough that we add the additional butter to cause the laminating, or the many layers of butter and fat. So in this case here, we're just adding a little bit more water to it. It was a little bit dry. You can see there, just adding a little bit more. So there will be a bit of a variance every single time you make it. Kneading it by hand here, bringing it together, working it, developing some of that gluten. We add the white wine vinegar to the dough. It's quite important because it actually strengthens the gluten, gives it a bit of elasticity, and helps it later on with the rolling and stretching process that the dough undergoes. There you can see we've just probably worked it for about a minute and a half here, and we've brought together our base dough, trying to keep it smooth. We don't want to overwork it, otherwise it's going to be difficult to roll it later on. Here we just place a little cross on it, and this is how we're going to incorporate the butter later on. It's then placed into the fridge and allowed to set for about half an hour. In this clip here, we've taken 450 grams of unsalted butter. On the corner of a bench where it's a little bit sturdier, we've got the diced butter, and we're just working it with the back of a rolling pin. And what we're creating there is sort of making the butter more malleable. One of the really important steps of making puff pastry with butter is that the base dough and the butter are at the same consistency, or the same texture. This helps with even rolling later on, and also prevents the butter bursting through the dough if it's too firm. So it's quite an important step. Once the dough is rested in the fridge for around about the half an hour mark, we then what we call pin out the cross that you cut previous. These are called the ears of the puff pastry, and we just simply pin them out. And what we're doing is we're creating an envelope that we can then place the butter inside of. There'll be a little bump in the middle there. We can place the butter in the middle of the dough and fold it up and incorporate the butter into the dough, and then we can proceed to rolling out the dough and creating the laminated effect that we want. Here we are, just squaring up the base dough, or the base butter, sorry, and placing it in the middle. It's important that the top layering of the dough and the base layering of the dough are at the same thickness, so that it's evenly captured with the base dough there. Just pinning it out a little bit to work with it. Okay, now it's ready to incorporate what we call a turn. You'll probably, once you've incorporated the butter, you'll probably be able to achieve maybe one turn into it. Here we are, pinning out the pastry, trying to keep even pressure across the pastry so that we don't have any bursting of butter coming out. And you can see in the demonstration there, we're trying to keep all of the ends square at all times. And that's important so that we end up with an even rise later on. And here we are incorporating what we call a single turn. So we're folding the top down and the bottom up, and that's a single turn, or a single book fold, it's also known as. Just batting it out lightly. That will then go back in the fridge and rest for about half an hour, marking it with the indentation. Once it's rested for about half an hour, we can then roll the pastry out again and incorporate another turn. We may even be able to incorporate two turns in this process. So here we are rolling it out to a long rectangle again, and we're going to do a technique of putting in a single turn again. You see here, bottom up, top down, and a good trick is bottom up, top down, and turning it clockwise. That's now had two turns, and marking it as appropriate. We can incorporate what we call a double turn into the process. So here we are making what we call the classic double turn. or double book. In total we need to have 6 turns. We need to rest the pastry 20 minutes between each turn. Once we've incorporated all 6 turns, it's now ready for pinning out for use. So this dough here has had 6 turns. So the process will take about 4 hours to achieve that from start to finish. And now we're just pinning out the pastry and making it ready for use. You can see it's on a lightly floured bench, and working the pastry evenly across the bench. Again, applying even pressure, which is quite important. There you go. It's also important to note that before we go to use our pastry, we need to, after rolling it out and before baking, we need to rest it. That allows the gluten in the dough to relax again. In this case, we're putting it in a bit of greaseproof paper, rolling it up and placing it back into the fridge. If you have a look at the next clip, you'll observe what happens if we take a cutter and we cut the pastry straight away. It'll no longer be round, it'll actually start to go into more of an oblong shape, as you'll notice in the next clip here. So I hope that helps you with the production of puff pastry. We've got a few pointers here to remember. Try and get the base dough and the butter at the same consistency. To ensure even lamination, keep the dough square at all times. It'll help with even rise. Allow the dough to rest for at least 20 minutes between each turn. And try to keep the dough cool at all times. It'll be easier to work with that way. And last but not least, always rest your pastry before cutting and baking. Here we've got a couple of examples of what you can do with puff pastry. Here's the classic apple tart tartane. This is what we call gâteau pétivier, or the puff pastry and frangipane tart, and probably the more well-known pie.